She stood in that courtroom, designer dress, perfect hair, stone-cold expression, and looked the judge directly in the eye and said, "Your Honor, my husband built nothing. He contributed nothing. Everything we have came from my family." I sat there at that table, hands folded, completely still, and I remember thinking, say it again. Because what happened next, what that judge said to her attorney in the next 60 seconds, completely dismantled 14 years of lies in a single afternoon.
My name is Daniel. I'm from a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everybody knows your business before you do. My dad worked at a sheet metal factory for 31 years. My mom cleaned houses 3 days a week. We weren't poor, but we knew the value of a dollar before we knew how to spell it. I wasn't the kind of guy who dreamed big. I was the kind of guy who worked big. There's a difference. I got into construction management right out of community college. Started as a site supervisor for a mid-sized contractor in Columbus. Long days. Early mornings. Muddy boots and sore shoulders. But I loved it. There was something deeply satisfying about watching something go from nothing, just raw dirt and blueprints, into a building where real people would live and work. I met Vanessa when I was 28. She was 30. Beautiful, confident, the kind of woman who walked into a room and owned it without even trying. Her father, Robert, was a well-established real estate developer in Central Ohio. Old money. The kind of family that had a lake house and a beach house and acted like that was perfectly normal. We dated for 2 years. She told me she admired my work ethic. Said I was real, in a world full of fake people. Her words. I held on to those words for years, probably longer than I should have. We got married in the summer. Big wedding. Her family paid for most of it. I didn't make a big deal out of that. I was just grateful and in love and naive enough to think gratitude and love were enough. We bought our first house together using a combination of my savings, about $60,000 I'd put away over 5 years, and a loan. Her father co-signed, which at the time I thought was generous. Later I'd understand it differently. We had 2 kids. Owen, now 12, and Lily, now 9. Those 2 children are the only perfect things I've ever been part of. For 11 years I woke up early, drove to job sites, managed crews, negotiated contracts, and came home tired. I wasn't the most romantic husband. I missed some dinners. I probably checked my phone too much. I'll own that. But I was there. I was loyal. I was faithful. And I was, slowly and steadily, building something real. The first time something felt off, I brushed it aside. That's what you do, right? You give people the benefit of the doubt, especially the person you've shared a bed with for over a decade. It was a Thursday evening. I came home earlier than expected. A big project had wrapped up ahead of schedule and I'd managed to leave the site by 5:30. I remember thinking, I'll surprise her. Maybe we'll actually have dinner together for once. When I pulled into the driveway, there was a car parked along the curb I didn't recognize. A silver Mercedes. I went inside. Vanessa was in the kitchen, and she looked startled. Not happy startled. Nervous startled. She said she'd had a friend over for coffee. But the coffee cups were already in the dishwasher. The kitchen was too clean. And when I asked who the friend was, she said, "Just someone from the gym. You don't know her." Her. That was the word she used. I let it go. I shouldn't have. Over the next several months, I started noticing small things. She was on her phone more, but would put it face down whenever I walked in. She started going to her parents' house more frequently. She began making comments, subtle ones at first, about her family's money versus our money. "My dad built this neighborhood, Daniel. We should be more grateful. You know, my mother always said a man who can't provide." She never finished that sentence. She never had to. Then one night, after the kids were in bed, I found a document on the shared printer. She'd forgotten to pick it up. It was an initial consultation summary from a family law attorney. She'd been planning this for at least 4 months before I even knew our marriage was ending. I didn't confront her that night. I took a picture of the document on my phone, put it back in the printer tray, and went to bed. I stared at the ceiling until 2 in the morning, while she slept next to me like nothing in the world was wrong. That's when I knew, the person I thought I knew had been performing for years. A week later, she sat me down at the kitchen table and told me she wanted a divorce. She was calm. Rehearsed. Like she'd practiced it in the mirror. She said she'd been unhappy for a long time. That she felt like we'd grown apart. That she deserved more. I asked her what more looked like. She didn't answer. What I found out over the following weeks, through mutual friends and eventually through my own attorney, was that Vanessa had been romantically involved with a man named Preston. He was a partner at her father's real estate firm. He drove a silver Mercedes. He was exactly the kind of man her family had always wanted her to be with. Polished. Connected. Born into the right rooms. I was the detour. The decade-long detour she was finally correcting. But here's where it gets really ugly. Her attorney filed a financial disclosure that was, to put it kindly, creative. According to their paperwork, the business I had spent the last 6 years building, a construction management company I had started from scratch, that now employed 14 people and had contracts with 3 county governments, was to be considered a marital asset of minimal value because, and I'm quoting directly here, the foundational capital and client relationships originated from the wife's family network. In other words, her family's name opened a few doors early on. According to her attorney, that meant she was entitled to 60% of the business. She wanted my company. The thing I had built with my own hands, my own reputation, my own 18-hour days. She wanted to walk away with Preston and take my business with her as a parting gift. And her father, the man who'd co-signed our first mortgage and once called me son at Thanksgiving dinner, was funding every dollar of it. I won't sit here and pretend I handled those months with grace. I didn't. There were nights I sat in my truck in the driveway and just couldn't go inside. Not because of her. But because I knew my kids were in there, doing homework, watching TV, living their normal lives, and everything was about to shatter for them. Owen asked me one night why Mom and I weren't sleeping in the same room anymore. I told him we were just giving each other space. He looked at me with those eyes, this kid is too smart for his age, and said, "Dad, I'm 12, not stupid." That broke something in me. I also made the mistake that a lot of men make in this situation. I underestimated what was coming. I thought the truth would just speak for itself. I thought the judge would look at the facts and see clearly. I thought 14 years of loyalty and work and sacrifice would count for something. My first attorney, who I fired after 60 days, basically told me to accept a settlement and move on. He said, "Judges don't like complicated business valuations. It could drag on for 2 years. 2 years. 2 years of my kids watching their parents fight over money while their mother's new boyfriend quietly moved into the picture." That's when I got serious. I hired a new attorney, a woman named Carol who had been doing family law for 22 years and had the energy of someone who genuinely loved proving people wrong. First meeting, she looked at Vanessa's financial disclosures and said, "They made some assumptions here. Let's find out if those assumptions hold up." That's when I stopped being a victim and started being a witness to my own life. Carol's strategy was simple but surgical. We weren't going to argue emotionally. We were going to document everything. I spent 3 weeks pulling together 6 years of business records. Every contract I had won independently. Every client I had cultivated with no connection to her family. Every loan I had repaid using company revenue. Every hire I had made. Every decision. What we discovered was that out of our total client base, exactly 2 of our current contracts had any early connection to her father's network. 2 out of 31 active accounts. And even those 2 had been renegotiated and renewed entirely on my company's own performance record. Her attorney's entire argument rested on a narrative that simply wasn't supported by the numbers. But there was more. Carol hired a forensic accountant who discovered something fascinating inside the family's real estate firm, the one Vanessa's father ran. Certain expense reimbursements had been flowing from the firm to Vanessa personally for the last 2 years. Not tied to any documented work. Not tied to any official roles she held. Just transfers. One possible explanation? Vanessa and her father had been quietly building her personal financial position in preparation for the divorce. Moving money to make her side of the settlement look stronger. Carol looked at me across the conference table and said, "Daniel, they didn't just come after your business. They came prepared. And they left tracks." I thought that was the moment everything changed. I was wrong. The real moment was still coming. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. I don't know why I imagined something more dramatic. High ceilings, mahogany, a full gallery. It was just a plain room in a county courthouse with fluorescent lighting and the faint smell of old coffee. Vanessa sat at the opposite table in a navy dress. Preston wasn't there, but I knew he existed in the room anyway, in the way she carried herself, in the confidence of her attorney's opening remarks, in the way her father sat in the gallery behind her like he was watching a business transaction he'd already closed. Her attorney was good. I'll give him that. He was polished and well-prepared, and he painted a picture of Vanessa as a woman who had sacrificed her own professional potential to support the family, whose family connections had been instrumental in launching my business, who deserved significant compensation for 14 years of partnership. Then he said it. He said that I had, quote, built nothing without the foundation this family provided. I looked at Carol. She didn't react. She just made a small note on her legal pad. When it was our turn, Carol didn't make a big speech. She stood up, asked to submit our documentation package into evidence, and then turned to the judge, a calm, no-nonsense woman in her late 50s named Judge Patricia Harmon, and said simply, "Your Honor, we'd like to ask one question of opposing counsel." Judge Harmon nodded. "Go ahead." Carol looked directly at Vanessa's attorney and said, "Can you identify, by name and contract number, which of Mr. Daniel's 31 active business accounts were obtained through the wife's family connections, and provide documentation showing those relationships were initiated by the family rather than by Mr. Daniel's independent outreach?" Silence. Not a pause. Silence. Vanessa's attorney shuffled papers. Leaned over to whisper to his assistant. Looked at the documents. Looked up. "We need additional time to..." "You filed a claim," Judge Harmon said, leaning forward slightly, "that this man's business was built on your client's family foundation. That is the basis for 60% asset division. You've had full discovery. You've had months of preparation. Are you telling this court you cannot document that foundational claim today?" More shuffling. A whispered conversation. A visible bead of sweat. "Your Honor, we believe the overall contribution of the family network, while not always formally documented..." "Counsel." Judge Harmon's voice dropped a register. "I'm going to need you to stop speaking in abstractions and start speaking in evidence." He couldn't. They had built an entire legal strategy on a story. A narrative. A version of events that sounded convincing in the abstract but fell completely apart when someone asked for the receipts. Judge Harmon looked over the forensic accountant's report. She reviewed the personal transfers from the family firm to Vanessa. She reviewed the full client account history of my business. When she spoke again, it was with the kind of measured, deliberate calm that somehow hits harder than anger. She said, "The court finds no credible evidence that the respondent's business was materially dependent on the petitioner's family connections. The court further notes with concern the pattern of financial transfers identified in Exhibit 14 and is referring this matter to the state's attorney for a preliminary review." She awarded me full ownership of my company. She adjusted the assets split significantly in my favor. She awarded me primary physical custody of the children, citing stability of routine and the documented disruption in the household over the prior 18 months. I didn't cry in that courtroom. I sat completely still. But in the parking lot afterward, sitting in my truck with Carol beside me, I put my face in my hands and shook for about 90 seconds straight. She put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You did good, Daniel. You did real good." That was 16 months ago. My company now has 19 employees. We just broke ground on a contract that's the biggest in our history, a mixed-use development on the east side of Columbus. When I drove past the site last week and saw the crew working in the early morning light, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Clean, uncomplicated, all mine pride. Owen and Lily are with me Sunday through Thursday. Lily is obsessed with drawing right now. She's filling up sketchbooks faster than I can buy them. Owen made the travel baseball team. I haven't missed a single game. Vanessa and Preston are together, from what I understand. Her father's firm hit some regulatory turbulence related to the financial review the judge triggered. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. I really don't. Some people ask me if I'm bitter. Honestly, I'm grateful. And I mean that in the most complicated, hard-earned way possible. Because here's what I learned, and I want you to hear this if you're sitting somewhere right now feeling like the ground has been pulled out from under you. The people who underestimate you are counting on you to believe them. Vanessa's entire strategy depended on me accepting her version of reality. That I was the passenger. That her family was the engine. That without them, I was nothing. And for a few dark months, I almost bought it. The moment I stopped accepting her narrative and started documenting my truth, everything changed. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But steadily, the way real things are built, one honest piece at a time. A judge didn't give me my life back. The work gave me my life back. It always had. If this story hit home, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who was supposed to love you, drop a comment below. Tell me your story. I read every single one. And if you believe that the truth, documented and patient, always finds its way to the surface, share this video. Someone out there needs to hear it today. I'll see you in the next one.